Is Sri Lanka on the path to dictatorship? The Prime Minister is fired and replaced by a former president. Is it a constitutional coup? And what are the implications both at home and in the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan, a sacked Prime Minister who's refusing to leave. His replacement, a former president appointed by his successor and a rival for the top job. The political crisis in Sri Lanka is threatening to spiral out of control and undermine stability in South Asia. Parliament's been warned of a bloodbath if the constitutional crisis isn't solved. A shooting at protesters has already killed one man. Lots to discuss with our guests in a moment, but first, Bernard Smith sets the scene in the capital, Colombo.
Supporters of Sri Lanka's ousted Prime Minister aren't going to let him go quietly. Ranil Wickremesinghe has refused to leave his official residence here in the capital since President Maithripala Sirisena fired him and suspended Parliament on Friday.
The President has violated the electoral mandate to strengthen democracy by trying to seize more executive powers. We won't allow it.
President Sirisena has sworn in Mahinda Rajapaksa as Prime Minister. Former President Rajapaksa lost the election 3 years ago, which was called after he'd scrapped the two-term limit for the presidency. Protesters and the Parliament Speaker say there's been a constitutional coup. The Prime Minister, they say, should be chosen by Parliament, not the President.
I think everyone is really surprised about what happened and everyone's really shocked, but everyone kind of feels like they need to figure out how we can stop this because we can't let this happen, not on our watch.
We are hoping that a protest of this nature by citizens, by the people of Sri Lanka who have a right for the government to follow the democratic process.
While posters of Rajapaksa have started appearing nationwide, the former president hasn't yet spoken publicly about his new appointment. The country's constitution was changed a couple of years ago to take power away from the president and give it to Parliament. President Sirisena says he's not breaking the law, but his critics will say he's going against the spirit of the constitutional amendment which was made to strengthen Sri Lanka's democratic institutions. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Colombo.
Let's have a look at some of the key events leading up to the current political crisis. The 25-year-old civil war ended in 2009 when government troops defeated Tamil Tiger rebels. President Mahinda Rajapaksa was re-elected a year later. The ruling coalition won a majority in Parliament and constitutional amendments were passed, allowing the president to seek an unlimited number of terms. Maithripala Sirisena defected from the government in 2014 to run against Rajapaksa in the presidential election brought forward by 2 years. Sirisena beat Rajapaksa to the presidency 3 years ago. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has formed a unity government after no party won a parliamentary majority. The two-term limit for the presidency was restored. Rajapaksa's party won local elections in February, dealing a major blow to the three-year-old government and President Sirisena. Let's introduce our panel. Joining us in Colombo, Dilanthe Withanage. He's a former government advisor in Sri Lanka. In London, Alan Keenan. He's the Sri Lanka project director at International Crisis Group. And also in Colombo, via Skype, Jehan Perera. He's the executive director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. A welcome to you all. I'd like to start with Jehan Perera in Colombo first. Is this a constitutional coup?
Well, it certainly is something that goes against democratic norms, we feel, because this is an action that took place without prior warning. Democracy is about public processes, but the removal of Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and the appointment of Prime Minister Rajapaksa took place without any warning at all. It caught everyone by surprise. That is not democratic. And thereafter, the president prorogues parliament, where Prime Minister Rajapaksa could have tried to prove his majority. So we have a situation now where people are talking about this in their homes on the streets, in buses, in the workplace. But they are not, we can't, our highest representatives, the parliamentarians, cannot discuss this problem and find a way out of the problem.
Let me bring in Dilanthe Withanage here. Was this a complete surprise, or were you expecting something like this was in the offing?
I think when we had the election in 2015, our organization, Bodubala Sena, its leader, we all predicted that this can happen. And today it became a reality, because we actually, we are not shocked about the situation, because we predicted this. Because in 2015, we explained that this is the marriage between two leaders who are politically, culturally, and socially different from each other. So we expect this to be happen soon. And you have to understand that although Jehan says that there is a big issue in the country, of course, we can talk about that there is a not according to democratic norms and all these things, but unfortunately, these leaders now talk about democracy when they are in trouble. Now, we have experienced during last 30 years, last 70 years after independence in this country, actually we don't have politics, we don't have democracy in this country. Actually, people vote, but after they get the votes, these leaders, they don't worry about people, they don't consider about people's voice. And actually, this crisis is not only a constitutional crisis, this is, we understand as a political crisis. But at the same time, you have to understand, and when there is a change of government like this in other countries, people come to street, people talk about this much, but people are fed up of these things and they don't worry about what is happening in the country. This is the problem.
Let me bring in Jehan Perera here. You heard what Dilanthe in Colombo had to say, that it wasn't a surprise that people are actually talking about this. What are they talking about in the country? These are two very strong leaders, two very strong personalities, both Wickremesinghe and Rajapaksa. Do you think that they did plot something like this?
I agree that there was a lot of tension between the president and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, who has been deposed. That tension began to manifest itself about a year after, and Dilanthe's explanations are accurate in that they are culturally different and they have come from two different political parties, but they did have something in common, and they were not racist in their approach. They were not nationalists. They were not hard nationalists. And they brought us the hope that together they would address the issues of national reconciliation. Now, what is very sad about this is that the president has gone outside of the democratic process. I mean, he has shut down the parliament, which should be discussing this issue. And this sets a very bad precedent for transfer of power. This is the first time that a government, that a prime minister has been removed. Although commanding a majority, that very day in parliament, they passed laws in parliament. And this is a prime minister who won in April. He won a vote of confidence from the parliament. He defeated a no confidence motion put forward by the then opposition. They have the opposition, who's now the government, have always been trying. For the last 2.5 years, they've been trying desperately to come back to power. And it's very sad that they have done it this way. Instead of waiting a little bit longer and then going for elections, they might have won those elections. But instead, they took a shortcut. And this shortcut is dangerous for our democracy.
Let's bring in Alan Keenan here in London. It's a shortcut. It's dangerous for Sri Lankan democracy, says our guest in Colombo. They've suspended the parliament. They've changed the leadership. Where do you land on all of this? How destabilising is all of this for Sri Lanka?
Well, it remains to be seen how destabilizing it is, but it's certainly, I would agree with Jehan, that it sets a very dangerous precedent. The way I think about it is that, for all of its faults, Sri Lanka for the last 30, 40 years, when there's been tremendous violence, the civil war with the Tamil Tigers, a number of very violent uprisings from left-wing Sinhala nationalists, lots of human rights violations. The one thing that did happen was a regular, peaceful turnover of leaders through votes and through democratic and constitutionally mandated procedures. This would be the first time where someone is brought into power through a means which are not allowed by the Constitution and which fly in the face of basic democratic norms, as Jehan was saying, so that they've crossed the threshold if Rajapaksa's appointment is allowed to stand. Now, there is still some chance that either Maithripala Sirisena will come under enough pressure domestically and internationally to change his mind, to reconvene Parliament quickly and allow a free and fair vote. At this point, that seems unlikely. It seems the whole point of proroguing or suspending Parliament appears pretty obvious to most people to have been to give Mahinda Rajapaksa enough time to cajole, to possibly buy, to influence, to promise perks to enough members of Parliament currently aligned with the Prime Minister Wickremesinghe to join his side, so that when Sirisena does finally reconvene Parliament, which is currently scheduled for the 16th of November, Rajapaksa will be able to say, I've got Parliament on my side. It's a democracy. Everything's fine. So that's what we want to have, if we want to preserve democratic norms, that is what we don't want to have happen. And I just want to point out, democratic norms are respected in order to function as a safety valve for social conflict. So while I'm not hoping for or predicting great violence, I think for Rajapaksa to come in this way is to produce a lot of resentment, a lot of anger among supporters of the UNP, Ranil Wickremesinghe's party, as well as more generally, not necessarily politically aligned citizens who feel that the people in power are not there legitimately. And that is a very dangerous thing in any country.
Dilanthe, let me bring you in here. Is there any upside of all of this? It seems that certainly the key politicians involved think this is a great idea for the country. But is it?
I don't think that the way how they describe there is a, people are worried about this. That's a main concern. When these things happen, then there's if the way how this change happened, if that happened in some other country, people will come to street on their own. But here, nothing like that happened. The UMP, after 3-4 days of the change of the government, they had to ask people to come to the rally. Even if you look at the rally, they were thinking about that 100,000 people. But I think merely 10,000 people came for that meeting. And actually what I'm trying to say is that during last 3.5 years, the government failed. Government couldn't do any reconciliation process. Tamil people in north and east, they are without houses, without jobs, without livelihoods. Actually, this government couldn't do much work in relation to the reconciliation. Can you understand that the government came into power showing that they will have the reconciliation? We have observed during last almost 4 years that there is no reconciliation between Prime Minister and the President of this country, and ministers and the President fighting with each other, and Prime Minister and some ministers of that government is fighting with each other. Actually, they gave the wrong expression, wrong understanding about reconciliation, and they want to just create reconciliation process, just having some reconciliation songs and films and something like that. Actually, at grassroots level, nothing happened to people in north and east. So therefore, we think that instead of they were blaming that there is a Rajapaksa family doing the country, instead of Rajapaksa family, Wickremesinghe clan, a number of ministers who are very close to Ranil Wickremesinghe, they try to run the government without looking at people's voice. I think we never felt that there is democracy in this country, because actually, if you look at in 2002, when the government changes happened, people were aware that one MP, member of parliament, can be bought if you spend something like 30 million. Now the situation is that everybody is talking. I don't know whether it's happening or not. Whether everybody is talking, even the social media says that the cost of an MP to cross over from each party is 300 million. So this is the bad situation. Actually, people are worried about not this political crisis. We are worried about no agriculture practices properly, no education properly, no transport, and all these health problems are there. These leaders, Ranil Wickremesinghe and the ministers of that government, they were not focusing more about these people's need. And when they are in trouble, when their positions are taken over, they are asking about democracy and asking people to come. I don't think people are supporting them.
Our guest says the people aren't supporting this. Jehan Perera, I'd like to bring you in here. He also says reconciliation has failed. He's also saying that there is allegations of corruption and systematic structural failure for the people. For all of those reasons, there seems to be some hope coming from Dilanthe Withanage that this new government may be able to rectify some of those problems. But you don't seem to be convinced, do you?
Yeah, I would like to disagree with Dilanthe on the issue of reconciliation. Because in 2015, the reason why the entire North and East, virtually 90% of the Tamil people, the Tamil vote, went against former president and now Prime Minister Rajapaksa. They went against him because there were so many problems those people faced during the war and after the war. Especially after the war, it was very bitter that the then government followed very nationalist policies. They didn't withdraw the military. They didn't look for the missing persons. They didn't compensate the victims in the way that they wanted to. They didn't return the land that had been taken over by the military. Now, all these things have happened during the period of this government. Not as quickly as the Tamil people want. The Tamil people, the victims, want solutions immediately. They can't wait. But it has been very difficult for this government to push forward the reconciliation agenda, because whenever they try to push it forward, immediately from the other side comes the shrill call that the country is going to be divided. The LTT is going to come back. But yet, this government instituted in the last year, they instituted an office for missing persons to address the most burning issue for Tamil people. What happened to their loved ones during the war? Over 20,000 people are missing. That's the number that have registered. There may be more. And then recently, the government also passed the legislation for an office of reparations to compensate the war victims. The cabinet, just about a month ago, approved a truth commission to find out what happened. 85% of the land taken over from the Tamil people has been returned. Of course, 15% has still to be returned, and that's causing a lot of bitterness among the Tamil people. The North and East is now free. The military is mostly in barracks. So, though the numbers still have to be reduced further, this government has done all of that. And I also like to address the issue of why the people have not spilt out on the streets. In a way, maybe our political culture is not one where people just come out on the streets like in other countries, because we have been a democratic society where people wait for elections to change their governments. They don't come out and engage in mass violent actions to get rid of governments. And when the UNP did call the people to come yesterday, I don't know whether it was only 10,000. To me, it seemed that there were much more people, many more people than 10,000. They came. They were disciplined. They came because they were concerned, not particularly because Prime Minister Wickremesinghe is out, but because the democratic process has been undermined, that a government that enjoys a majority in parliament is just dissolved like that. That's why they came.
Let's bring in Alan Keenan here in London. The man at the centre of all of this, Mahinda Rajapaksa. You've studied the man for a very long time. What are your thoughts on him, and do you have any concerns?
Well, I have a lot of concerns. I think, yes, I mean, what was striking about Dilanthe's points, I think he, just if I could go back to those in order to get back to your question. I mean, it's true, this government, or whichever, the government of Wickremesinghe and Sirisena together, failed comprehensively, I think, across the board to really address people's everyday needs, economically and socially, and seemed out of touch. Didn't sell what little progress, some of which Jehan has just mentioned, on reconciliation. They didn't sell it very well. They didn't fight against the nationalist critiques reconciliation and of accountability, and they failed to really pursue in a serious and comprehensive way all the many allegations of corruption and political murders under the previous Rajapaksa presidency. So I think they became very unpopular, and I think economically speaking, especially given the current global sort of economic pressures Sri Lanka is facing, a lot of people are fed up with this government. So that may be one reason why there's not more people on the street, because I think a lot of people would be fine with this government going. But I think Jehan's point is an important one. How it goes is absolutely essential if you want to have something you call a democracy and respect the rule of law. And I think to imagine, as Dilanthe seems to, that a government led by Prime Minister Rajapaksa would be more inclined towards reconciliation with the Tamils and the Muslims and bringing them together with the Sinhala Buddhists in Sri Lanka is really laughable. I think the history of Rajapaksa's rule as president was a fairly brutal one for both Muslims and Tamils. And there's no reason to think that has changed, except perhaps tactically in order to win some of their votes in the elections that are due in the next year or so. So, you know, a lot of people, also, and one final thought, I think perhaps one reason a lot of people are not on the streets is because they're afraid of the Rajapaksas. I mean, there were mass level disappearances under the Rajapaksa regime, people just being picked off the street and presumably murdered and never appeared again. There were, you know, tens of thousands of people killed illegally at the very end of the war. A repressive apparatus was, you know, set up throughout society. No real media freedom. So I think people might be a bit scared to speak out on the assumption that Rajapaksa, that his unconstitutional ascendance to power will in fact be confirmed at some point soon.
Dilanthe in Colombo, let me bring you in here. Very quickly, I'd like to talk about the region itself. Right now, what are China, what are India thinking when they're looking at the situation in Sri Lanka?
Actually, we are victims of various issues. And today, I believe that China, India, US, all these countries will try to manipulate the situation, because we understand that even during the last elections also, 2015, those international pressures and international support were there to defeat Mahinda Rajapaksa. Actually, unfortunate situation is that our leaders, they wanted to defeat Rajapaksa, but they never had a good program to develop this country. That's why economically and socially, people are deprived of the situation. And actually, some people were saying that, you know, during Rajapaksa time, brutally Tamils and Muslims, they attacked Muslims and Tamils. But I have to tell you that after President Sirisena came into power, during Ranil Wickremesinghe's time, there were a lot of Sinhala Muslim clashes, and there were some issues related to Kandy problem. And some people say that
we are running out of time here. Now, we'd like to get to our other guests as well. Jehan Perera, I want to bring you in here very quickly about regional stability. What are China, what are India thinking when they're taking a look at this situation?
I know there's a very big, it looks like there's a big competition between China, India, and also the US for presence in Sri Lanka. I think we have to be especially mindful of India. India is our neighbor. India has very legitimate security concerns. China has a lot of money. And especially during the Rajapaksa period, when he was president, it seemed as if they gave unlimited credit, unlimited loans, which the Rajapaksa government took. And the Rajapaksa government did things, visible infrastructure development, but a lot of it is like white elephant infrastructure development, an airport in the middle of a bird sanctuary, a cricket stadium where no one goes to. But that was visible. So then we fall into debt with China. And then this government had to cope with that problem. They have to then let China take over some of the land. Then that upsets India. India is very upset that Sri Lanka has sold its port.
I'm
Or at
sorry,
least
we
it's
are
spoken on
out
very
of time here. I would like to just thank all our guests, Dilanthe Withanage, Alan Keenan and Jehan Perera. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.